analytical techniques, we completed the gas chromatography and gas chromatography mass spectrometry. Today, we will be discussing about high performance liquid chromatography or HPLC. So, I'll be sharing the slides. So, high performance liquid chromatography, or sometimes it is called as high pressure liquid chromatography, because it is called as high pressure liquid chromatography because we are using pumps to pump the solvent or the mobile phase through the column. As usual, here also we have a stationary phase and a mobile phase. The stationary phase is solid and the mobile phase is a liquid. So what we will do is the stationary phase, the solid stationary phase is housed in a column, and the mobile phase, that is the usually we use a solvent, and the mobile phase is pumped at high pressure through this column, because these columns will be tightly packed and we have to apply pressure so that the solvent will move at a constant rate through the column. So that is high pressure or high performance liquid chromatography. And here the parts which we have in a HPLC system is a solvent reservoir. Don't think it is a very huge part. Actually, it is the solvent reservoir. Usually we have is bottles, glass bottles, 1 liter or 2 liter bottles, which act as solvent reservoir. Then we have pump, as I told you, which pumps which draws the solvent from the solvent reservoir and pump it to the column. In between the pump and the column, we have an injector wherein we inject the sample, so that the solvent, which is that is the mobile phase, which is pumped by the pump, flows through and carries the injected sample through to the column. I will show the diagram, but I will repeat it again. We have a pump which draws. Here we have a solvent reservoir. From the solvent reservoir, solvent will be drawn by the pump, and this pump will be pumping the solvent into the column. And in between the pump and the column, we have an injector which injects the sample into that line, so that the pumped solvent will carry the sample into the column. And column contains the stationary phase wherein we separate out the compounds, and at the end of the column we have a detector. As usual in GC, we have several kinds of detector in HPLC also. And after the detector, we have a recorder. Usually it is a computer system to analyze the signals. So the parts include solvent reservoir, pump, injector, column, detector, and a recorder. So this is the components of HPLC. This is a diagrammatic representation, as I told you. This is a solvent reservoir. I told you it is nothing but here it is given as a conical flask. Actually, it is a glass bottle in which we will fill the mobile phase. Usually in pesticide residue analysis, this mobile phase is nothing but a solvent. We have a pump which draws the, just like a pump which we use in our home for domestic purpose, a pump which will draw water from the well and pumping it to the tank, water tank. Similar to that, we have a pump which draws solvent from the reservoir and pumps it to the HPLC, to the column. And in between the pump and the column, we have an injector which injects the sample into the line, so that the sample will get mixed with the solvent, and that sample will be carried over to the column. Once it comes out of the column, within the column, the compound will get separated, and the separated compounds, once it comes out of the column, it will be detected by the detector, and we can see the chromatogram. So this is the diagrammatic representation of an HPLC system. In HPLC system, just like GC, I told you the old GC systems had isothermal. That means a single temperature will be maintained throughout the analytical period. But nowadays we have programming facility, that means we can vary the temperature during the analysis. Here also, in earlier HPLC systems, we had isocratic mode. Isocratic mode means a single solvent will be there and a single pump will be there, and that single pump will be pumping that single solvent into the column. So we can use only single solvent. But now we have gradient HPLC. Gradient HPLC means instead of one column, we may have two or four. Usually, if we use two bottles and two pumps, we call it as binary HPLC. Type it as binary. That means we'll have two reservoirs and each reservoir will be connected to separate pumps. If sometimes we may have four reservoirs and four pumps, in that case, that kind of an HPLC is called as a quaternary HPLC. Quaternary. This quaternary HPLC means we have four reservoirs. Each reservoir will be connected to four pumps. And if you are using a binary or quaternary HPLC, after the pump, we will have a mixing unit. I'll show over here in the diagram. So here if we have a pump, this is isocratic, single reservoir, single pump. If we have two reservoirs and two pumps, both the pumps will draw the sample from the respective reservoir, and here we will have a mixer wherein both the solvents which is drawn by both the pumps will be mixed and will be fed together into the HPLC column, and in between we will have the injector. There will be a mixing unit. So here in gradient mode, what we normally do is we can fix the, just like temperature we have adjusted in the case of a gas chromatograph, the proportion of solvents that is pumped into the column can also be varied in a gradient HPLC. I will explain it. Say if we have one bottle containing solvent A and another bottle containing solvent B. So if we program the system, we just type it in the computer that once we start the analysis, draw 100% from solvent A. So at that time, what will happen is only the pump which is connected to the reservoir A will function, and the pump which is connected to reservoir A will B will not function, and the pump which is connected to reservoir A will carry the solvent into the column. So in the program we have written that after 5 minutes change the mobile phase into 75% A and 25% B. In that case, after 5 minutes, what will happen is that the both A as well as B will work. That means the pump which is connected to the reservoir A as well as B will work, but it will be such that the 75% of the solvent will be from solvent reservoir A and 25% will be from solvent reservoir B. That means if you're taking if 10 ml of solvent is flowing, 7.5 ml will be from A and 2.5 will be from B. It will be mixed in that proportion. Then again we can program that after 10th minute change the proportion to 50-50. That means 50% will be from reservoir A and 50% will be from reservoir B. Then after 15th minute, change it to 25-75. At that time, 25, a quarter of it will be from reservoir A and 3/4 of it will be from reservoir B. So like that, in gradient mode, we can change the solvent component. So that this will help us in getting a better chromatogram over a period of time. Could you understand what is a gradient mode HPLC?
Sir,
Ah,
So whether we are using single solvent or
No,
more
we
than
won't. No, we will be using, if it is a single solvent, we won't be using gradient mode. If we have a binary and quaternary system, we can use it in an isocratic mode also. There is no problem in that. For the entire analytical time, if you are using a single solvent, say your analysis requires only a single solvent, there is no need for two or three solvents. Then in that case, even if you have a binary or quaternary system, you can use it as an isocratic mode. That means only one pump and one reservoir will be functioning at that time. 100% of the time solvent will be drawn from a bottle. If you want to use two or three solvent systems, then only you go for binary or quaternary.
okay, sir.
We have a quaternary system over quaternary HPLC system over here, but usually we use it as a binary system because we usually have most of the HPLC analysis. We need to use only two solvent system. One will be, say, mostly we may use one bottle we may use methanol, and another bottle we may use acetonitrate. These two are the solvents which we normally use in pesticide residue analysis. So acetonitrile and methanol. So one bottle will be having acetonitrile, one bottle will be having methanol. And in so here, though we have quaternary, we use it as a binary system. Coming to the next, that is the solvent reservoir and pump also. If we have isocratic mode, only one pump is there. In gradient mode, binary pump, binary HPLC means we will have two. Quaternary means four. So that is the thing. Depending upon the HPL system, we will vary the pump also. Coming to the column, unlike this one, GC columns. GC columns are usually, the capillary columns are made of, usually made of copper, though it can be made of aluminum, etc. Here it is generally made of stainless steel. Can you see this? See my video. So this is an HPLC column. This is made of stainless steel, usually 5 to 30 centimeter long. Just I will check what is the length. This is 15 centimeter. This is 150 into 2 mm. That means this is 15 centimeter long and the diameter is 2 mm. So this is the specification. So we usually get in 5, 10, 15, 20, etc. That is the usual length. 25, maximum 30 centimeter is the length which we normally get for HPLC column. The diameter is usually 3 or 5 mm. And in pesticide residue analysis, we normally go for reverse phase HPLC, not normal phase. In reverse phase HPLC, the stationary phase is non-polar. The stationary phase is non-polar, and usually in that stationary phase, we have C8 or C18 filled stationary phase. The column will be having a stationary phase containing C8 or C18 molecules. C8, if we increase the carbon chain without any addition of hydroxyl group, say CH3, CH2, 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 at the end CH3. So if we have such 8 carbon chain, it is called a C8. If we have 16 carbon chain, we have C18. That means if we have 8 carbon chain, it will be non-polar. If it is 16 carbon chain, 18 carbon chain, then it will be extremely non-polar. So depending upon our requirement, we usually select C8 or C18 column. So that we can vary. C8 or C18 normally doesn't, for specific analysis only we vary. Otherwise, normally we purchase C18 column, very non-polar column. Whereas the mobile phase will be polar. That's why we normally use methanol, acetonitrate, or water. Water is an extremely polar solvent, and methanol is also having polarity similar to water, and acetonitrile is slightly polar. It is in the beginning part of polarity. So we use these solvent mixtures, acetonitrile, methanol, or water. Water we have to normal tap water won't do, normal distilled water also won't do. We need to use HPLC grade water, very ultra pure inert water we have to use. So that's reverse phase chromatography, wherein we will use non-polar stationary phase, usually C8 or C18, and mobile phase is polar. Usually we use acetonitrile, methanol, or HPLC. Normal phase HPLC is not common in pesticide residue analysis, where the stationary phase, this reverse stationary phase is polar, wherein we have stationary phases. Silica gel and the mobile phase is non-polar one. Clear regarding the column?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Then we comes the detector. We have UV visible detector, photodiode array detector, refractive index detector. We call it as RI detector, fluorescence detector, electrochemical detector, and LCMS, just like GCMS, mass spectrometry also. At the end of the column, if we connect a mass spectrometer, we have LCMS. So we'll see quickly see one by one. It is comparatively easy with if we compare with DCMS. The UV visible detectors are similar to spectrophotometers. That means if the compound is having a bit of color, say absorbance, we know the absorbance of that substance at the particular wavelength it has absorbance. Then what we will do is we will set there will be a UV lamp or a visible lamp, just like in spectrophotometer. We will fix that wavelength at that particular wavelength where the compound is having absorbance, and the column effluent, that means the solvent which is coming out of the column will be scanned at that particular wavelength, and if there is any absorbance we will detect it as the because of the sample, because of the compound. So that is nothing but UV visible spectrophoton, wherein the column will the samples coming out of the column will be scanned at a particular wavelength. Almost all the compounds will have an absorbance at a particular wavelength. If we know that, then we can scan it. This will work only if the compound is colored. Have you ever worked with UV visible spectrophotometer? I think no. Yesterday I asked, nobody worked it.
Sir, അത് ക്വാളിറ്റേറ്റീവ് അനാലിസിസ് മാത്രമാണോ?
For what?
കോമ്പൗണ്ടിന്റെ കളർ വെച്ച്.
Yeah, yes. Wherein we will develop a color and we will read it in spectro. I think you might have done it in the soil science practicals in UG. So that we will develop a color and the absorbance will pass light through that sample, and we will measure the absorbance. We can measure transmittal power. Usually we measure absorbance, and depending upon the color, absorbance will vary. But we have to fix a particular wavelength, because only at that particular wavelength the absorbance will occur. So here also it is the same manner. Then comes photodiode array detector. In photodiode array detector, this is similar to UV visible detector, but the photodiode array detector has the ability to scan entire spectrum, UV visible spectrum. Just like we discussed the GCMS, wherein we can scan the voltage in quadruple one. It changes from lowest to highest in a quick span of time, very short span of time, so that the entire mass can be scanned within a short span of time. In a photodiode array detector also, the same thing can be done. That means the entire wavelength spanning from UV, that will be around 250 or 200 nanometer to about 800 nanometers. The visible part can be scanned by photodiode array detector and complete during that scanning period, whatever the compound, any compound, even if you don't know the absorbance, as the entire spectra is scanned within a short period, even if there is a compound is passing at that time, Whatever be the absorbance, it will give a signal. So that is photodiode array detector. This is the one which is routinely used in pesticide rescue analysis. This is the detector which we have in our lab also. Then we have fluorescence detector, just like nitrogen phosphorus detector that we have, or flame photometric detector, certain compounds which emit certain kind of light when it is at a high energy state. Like that, fluorescence detectors are used for compounds that fluoresce at a particular wavelength, compounds which have fluorescence. That fluorescence can be detected, that is called fluorescence detector. So this is with respect to HPLC. Uh, any clarifications do you need for HPLC?
No, sir.
No.
No, sir.
Okay. So we have completed. Have you heard about 3 R's of pesticide?
Yes, sir.
What are the 3 R's?
Resistance.
Resid
Resistance, residue,
Resurgence.
resurgence. So we have completed resistance, we have completed residue. Now we are moving into resurgence. The third R. Whenever we discuss about the resurgence, I will just ask: have you gone through the key of yeah, ARS net exam?
Yes, sir.
Yes. How is your score? Whether you'll be able to go into the mains exam of ARS? What are the
We
prospects?
don't know, sir. Depending upon cutoff, we have to decide.
Okay.
We don't know what cutoff they will give.
Okay. So I think if you feel that you have a chance of getting a call for mains, then start preparing for the subjective part today onwards. Okay. Because if you wait for the results, then it will be extremely late. So coming to resurgence, do anyone know what is resurgence?
Increase in the pest population when compared to initial population.
Yeah, I agreed. One more thing you have to add: increase in pest population when compared to
Due to indiscriminate use of pesticides.
due to, we can say that following the use of a pesticide. That means our intention of a pesticide use to reduce the pest population. So resurgence, the reverse happens. Instead of reducing the pest population, the pesticide use increases the pest population. That is insect resurgence. Then also we have to think one thing is that increase in pest population happens only in the pesticide treated area. In the untreated area, there won't be any increase in pest population. Only in the treated area we have increase in pest population. That is the definition of resurgence. So you can see the definition now: increase in pest population exceeding natural untreated population following pesticide application. That means that there will be an increase in pest population when compared to untreated area following the use of a pesticide. That's what we discussed. And another definition is statistically significant increase in insect population or damage in insecticide treated plots over the untreated plots. But also the same. There will be a significant increase in pest population in insecticide treated plots over untreated plots. Clear the definition?
സർ
Ah,
ഒരു ചെറിയ ഡൗട്ട് എനിക്ക് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നത് സെയിം പെസ്റ്റ് പോപ്പുലേഷൻ നമ്മൾ ടാർഗറ്റ് പെസ്റ്റ് പോപ്പുലേഷൻ തന്നെ ഇൻക്രീസ് ചെയ്യണം എന്നുണ്ടോ?
yes, it should be. Otherwise, we can't say that. If you see one more thing, the there is. I will come to a. Normally, we can discuss about resurgence in the same way, but if the thing Safna discussed is nothing but secondary pest outbreak. What Safna asked is, if you spray for a target pest, Instead of decrease in the population of target pest, there is an increase in the population of target pest. What happens if there is an increase in the non-target pest? That means a minor pest which has become a major pest. We will discuss anyway at the end of this session. We will discuss about that also. But that is nothing but secondary pest outbreak. Understood? Okay, we'll discuss it. We'll discuss it today itself. So, resurgence is classified in can be classified into in two ways. We can classify. One classification is acute resurgence is and chronic resurgence, and the second classification is primary and secondary. In the second classification, that is primary and secondary. I will discuss that primary and secondary first. The primary resurgence is mainly with the target pest, and the secondary resurgence is with the non-target pest. We'll discuss later. First, we will discuss acute and chronic resurgence. In acute resurgence, just like acute toxicity, quick resurgence development. That means if you spray for the first time in the population, in the F1 generation, the next generation itself, there will be an increase in the population of insect pests. This is mainly with broad spectrum insecticides such as mainly with synthetic pyrethroids, OP, carbamates, etc. Because once you go for this broad spectrum synthetic pyrethroids, all the natural enemies will get killed. And because of the absence of natural enemies, the F1 generation without any hindrance from natural enemy, it multiplies very quickly. So that is acute resurgence that occurs within the next generation. But chronic resurgence, this is not much related to the population of natural enemies and it takes time. That's why it is called as chronic. That means after a few generations of pesticide, then only chronic resurgence occurs. And this is mainly with new generation pesticides, which doesn't have this broad spectrum or quick knockdown action. And this most of the new generation pesticides are less harmful to natural enemies, so there won't be any quick reduction in natural enemy population. But this kind of pesticides can impart some physiological changes in the insect as well as plant, which may contribute to the increase in pest population. We will discuss about it later. What can be the physiological or biochemical changes that occur in an insect or on a plant which contribute to the increase in pest population. This is highly proven with especially new generation pesticides. That means there will be a change. There nothing related to the change in the population of natural enemy, but the change in physiological change in the insect, that means the target pest, insect pest, or the plant, which will lead to some physiological or biochemical changes which lead to an increase in pest population. Even there are certain fungicides which are reported to cause resurgence in insects because they change some physiological parameters of insects, make them more make them more breed more. So that is what happening with uh, acute resurgence and chronic resurgence. I will show a chart. Okay, here you can see what happens with acute resurgence and chronic resurgence. This is acute resurgence, this is chronic resurgence. See this. This graph, you are using the pesticide, the pest load will decrease. Within the F1 itself, there will be a huge increase in pest population. But in the case of chronic resurgence, you apply a pesticide, pest population decrease, it remains there at the low level up to F3 generation, then only there will be an increase in pest population. See what happens over here. See, in the acute resurgence, normally it with broad spectrum insecticide. You spray a pesticide, both pest will be present and natural enemy present. Both pest as well as natural enemy will get killed. Because say, take the case of a synthetic pyrethroid, which is a broad spectrum insecticide. It kills both natural enemy as well as a pest. So, as the natural enemy population is decreased, pest population will increase in the F1 generation itself. So that is acute resurgence. But take the case of chronic resurgence. Here we use a new generation pesticide molecule It will reduce the pest population, but it won't have much impact on natural enemy population. But this pesticide slowly it can alter the plant as well as the plant physiology as well as the physiology of insect pests, which can favor the multiplication of insect pests. We will discuss what all things change the physiology and biochemistry of plant and insects. This is the next kind of classification I told you: primary pest resurgence and secondary pest resurgence. Secondary pest resurgence, we also call it a secondary pest outbreak. So this is what we have discussed. Primary pest resurgence, we have the natural enemy. See, this is the natural enemy. This is the pest. So we go for a pesticide spray. Once the pesticide spray is applied, all the natural enemy will get killed. Only a few pests will be remaining. All of the pest population also will get destroyed. But in the F1 generation, since there are no natural enemies, the pest population multiplies quickly. But what happens in secondary pest outbreak or secondary pest resurgence? Here we have the pest, natural enemy, and we have a minor pest over here, this larvae. We have the minor pest. We go for the spray, all the pest as well as natural enemy will get killed, and there is the say if we are using, consider this, I will take an example. Consider this as a aphid, and this is say a coccinellid, and this is a Lepidopteran caterpillar. So we used in neonicotinoid, and this neonicotinoid invariably it will kill aphid, and it had some detrimental effect on the coccinellid also. But you know that this neonicotinoid will not have any effect on Lepidopteran pests. So all the Lepidopteran pests will survive, and we have a huge population of Lepidopteran pests. So this is called as secondary pest outbreak or secondary pest resurgence. This is what Safna told. Whether this should be with basically with the target pest. Sometimes the non-target pest, the minor pest also can become major with the use of pesticides. Are you clear with the classification? Then I will give a few examples. So some field-related examples. Yes. So one experience I had, that is the experience with is still an issue in the farmers field. In Kerala, we have an area where commercial mango cultivation is practiced. That is in Palakkad district, adjacent to our Thrissur district itself, and that area is called as Mudalamada. That panchayat name is Mudalamada. Mudalamada, we have huge mango orchards, and the advantage of this Mudalamada area is that in our country, the first crop of mango comes to market from Mudalamada. So since it is the first crop in the season, it receives very huge price. The crop will get ready for marketing by January, February and all. And by March and all, usually the crop will be over. From April onwards, other area. So Bindu and Swati, what is the usual mango season in your state? Your state is also a
It
major
starts from
March. Here it's early, especially in Mudalamada area. In other parts of Kerala, it's not that early, but in Mudalamada, it's too early. Mudalamada is a dry area. So because of that, and they also use that growth hormone paclobutrazol. So because of that. So because of the very high price, farmers used to go for there. Usually they had only few pests such as hoppers and all, and they continued to use repeatedly use several pesticides. And what they did was, usually we recommend neonicotinoid. Thiamethoxam is recommended for its management, but they mixed it with synthetic pyrethroids and repeatedly sprayed for hoppers 3, 4, 5 times. And 3 years back in 2018, they had a new pest over there. Actually, it is thrips. Thrips is a problem. Have you ever studied about thrips in mango?
No, sir.
No, sir.
No. But if you scan the literature, you can see certain thrips infesting young flushes of mango. We have seen it. If you work in certain farms and all where they have production of mango graft, their thrips is a problem. The newly emerging flushes will get infested with thrips. That is what I have usually observed thrips in population in field also. If you observe closely, sometimes you can see the young emerging, that brown flushes, new flushes of mango will be crinkled and curled. So that is normally seen in leaf. It doesn't cause much damage. There will be some crinkling, the leaves will recover. That's what we don't normally recommend any insecticide spray for that. But here there was an increase in the thrips population, and that did not occur in the leaf. All this thrips population was on inflorescence. Myself and our mother sir went to field at that time together, and once we visited the field, we took a piece of paper, white paper, we tapped the inflorescence onto that white paper, and we counted the number of thrips in each inflorescence. It was more than 1,000 thrips in each inflorescence. We can see the entire white paper covered with thrips. We were seeing it for the first time. Huge population of thrips infesting mango inflorescence. And because of the huge population of thrips in mango inflorescence, uh, entire inflorescence were getting damaged. The fruit set is almost zero. Even if a few fruit set occurs, the fruit will be damaged by feeding of thrips. You can see the skin of the mango slightly crinkled and that mango does not fetch any price in the market. So this is was the scenario, and they were using invariably they are using imidacloprid, the usual pesticides which we recommend for thrips, imidacloprid, thiamethoxam, all those pesticides they are used, and instead of decrease in the thrips population, it is increasing. So I scanned literature. Why thiamethoxam or imidacloprid, neonicotinoids, which are effective against thrips in other crops, say chili and all, it's not working in the case of this inflorescence thrips. So in US and all, Western flower bud thrips, Western flower bud thrips, they it is a major issue in infesting flowers. So once I scanned the literature, the information is was very was revealing. The thing was that neonicotinoid, it gets readily translocated to leaves. If you spray it, it has very good xylem mobility. It gets easily translocated to leaves. So all the thrips which are present on the leaves will get instantaneously get killed. But its translocation to inflorescence is very meager. The neonicotinoid will get translocated easily to the leaf but not to inflorescence. So what will happen? The leaves will have high load of pesticide, but inflorescence will be normally devoid of the pesticide load. So all the thrips started migrating from the leaf to the inflorescence. So this is what I learned from literature. Then again, repeatedly every year I am visiting this Mudalamada area at least 3 or 4 times. So I visited on one farmer's field. So wherein that farmer's name is Saju. He's still in contact with me. Saju is a farmer which was practicing IPM for this pest management in mango. He was in contact with the KVK. So Dr. Sumia was guiding him in adopting IPM practice in mango. So the pesticide load was very low. He actually sprayed only twice or thrice. So once we visited the mango orchard, the thrips population in the inflorescence was low, and we can see thrips population, huge thrips population remaining in the new flushes of mango. That means the, if you reduce the pesticide load, the thrips will remain in the flushes itself. Otherwise, if you increase the pesticide load, especially neonicotinoid, it will migrate to flushes. It's very simple. So this is what usually happens in the field. Increase in pesticide use leading to emergence of a pest. We are contributing to its emergence. Usually it's not resistance alone. This is one thing which uh, practically I have observed in the field. This thing happened in coccinia also. You might have studied about ivy called coccinia. Near to our college, we have an area where huge tracts of area under ivy gourd cultivation. There are also repeated sprays of pesticides, and because of the repeated sprays, there was an increase in thrips population, and the entire crop in that area got destroyed by. So this is very common now because of excessive pesticide use. So what can be the causes of a resurgence? We discussed about primary this acute and chronic. That is mainly discussed over here. The first is impact of pesticide on natural enemies that we have discussed in the case of acute. And second, in the chronic, I discussed it will alter the physiology and biochemistry of plants and insects. So that is the thing we will discuss it in a bit detail. So, what are the impact of pesticide on natural enemies? As I discussed, in the case of broad spectrum insecticides such as synthetic pyrethroids, OP, and carbamates, it will kill all the natural enemies, and the pest population can easily survive in the F1 generation. And sometimes even herbicides and fungicides can also be lethal to natural enemies. That's why I told in the first few slides itself. Sometimes fungicides can also cause resurgence. Then, other than toxicity to natural enemies, there can be a reduction in the natural enemy surveys. That means there can be a decrease in the prey consumption. What is the service natural enemies does to us? It consumes the pest and reduce the pest population. But if you reduce, it won't stop the pest consumption altogether. It may decrease its consumption. That means the reduction will be very limited. So that will be, there will be a reduction in the natural enemy service. And the third impact is influence on the parasite behavior. In parasite here, consider predator and parasitoid. You can rename it as influencing the natural enemy behavior and fecundity. Sometimes it can reduce the predation and parasitism that we discussed earlier. And use of pesticides can reduce the foraging ability. That means the predator or parasitoid won't be able to locate its host insect. So reduced foraging ability. Sometimes the use of pesticide can reduce the fecundity of the pesticide and prolong its developmental time. That means, say the adult completes its life cycle in say 1 week, it may be prolonged to 1.5 or 2 weeks, and it may reduce the fecundity. Sometimes the use of pesticides may repel the parasitoids from the field. So all those things are the impact of pesticides on natural enemies. It can cause mortality, it can reduce the consumption, it can reduce the fecundity, it can reduce the foraging ability, it can prolong the developmental time, it can reduce the predation or parasitism, and it can cause repulsion of the natural enemies. Are you clear?
Yes,
There
sir.
is nothing much complicated over here. And coming to the influence of pesticides on physiology and biochemistry of plants and insects. See, uh, earlier I thought that if you see the have you observed? I don't know whether you observed it or not. Earlier, mite population was not a major issue in vegetable crops and all. But nowadays, mites is a major issue even during rainy season. Usually, we consider rainy season as free of mite population. But nowadays, mite problem is very severe in several crops. So one reason I thought was that was my assumption. Earlier, we were using OP insecticides such as dimethoate and all for managing sucking pests and all. Almost all the OP insecticides are having broad spectrum, that is insecticidal, nematicidal, acaricidal properties that you might have studied. With the introduction of neonicotinoids for managing sucking pests, we switched over to imidacloprid, thiamethoxam, estamiprid, etc. Once we switched over to neonicotinoids, these neonicotinoids are extremely specific to sucking pests. Whereas OP insecticides which we were using earlier were controlling insects as well as mites. So since we were using a pesticide which is extremely effective against sucking pests and not effective against mites, mite population slowly started building up. Just a minute. So this will say I thought it was like that because of, but later on I had an opportunity to present a paper in national conference on plant physiology 2 years back. It was held here only. They invited me for a talk on impact of pesticides on the physiology of crops. So at that time, I found that it's not that alone. Imidacloprid is the not only imidacloprid, these neonicotinoids are having some impact on the physiology of plants. It even affects the third trophic level, that means the predators and parasitoids. It has the ability to affect the third predators and parasitoids also, it may affect. So, that kind of an impact pesticides are having on plants as well as insect pests. So one example I have given is here is that that was I'm not going into that presentation because that presentation is entirely different topic, but it is related to this. But I will give an example over here. If you're using imidacloprid in rice, the oxalic acid, which is a compound which is present in rice, which contribute to resistance to insect pests, will decrease, and the sugar content will increase. And as you all know, phenol, which is a compound which impart uh, 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 resistance in crops. We usually study the phenol content in some post-plant resistance studies and all, total phenol content. Those combo crops or varieties which are having high phenol content is resistant to insect. But if you are using imidacloprid, oxalic acid and phenol content, which contributes to resistance to insect, will decrease, whereas sugar content, which favors the buildup of insect pests, will increase. These kind of physiological change, that when I was invited for that talk, I was not sure about that topic. But once I scanned into the literature, this information was extremely startling. That means there is huge physiological changes which is happening in the plant, which the entomologists have to understand. We recommend a pesticide. This pesticide can affect the physiology of the plant, and once it affects the physiology of the plant, even up to gene expression level. we've seen a few papers which went into gene expression studies on studies, and what will be how the genes will be expressed because of pesticide spray. And one study it is extremely important was that if you go for a pesticide spray, it will act on a gene, and that gene will lead to an increase in mite population and decrease in the predators of mite population. So those kind of interactions are there between uh, pesticides and physiology. So those kind of things we normally avoid. So this is an area which we entomologists should work on, because if we have a very good biotechnologist to collaborate, we can have those kind of studies. So that can be one change in physiology which can contribute to the increase in pest population. Sometimes the pesticide spray can increase the feeding rate in the insect pest. That means it can lead to some changes. That means insect may feed more. That means damage more. Increase in the fecundity of the insect pest. It can sometimes reduce the life cycle. That means if the insect was completing its life cycle in say 30 days, with the use of pesticide, it will complete life cycle in 25 days. What will happen? More number of generations. So those kind of reduction in life cycle, and sometimes increase in the longevity. If the adult insect is living longer, it may damage more. So those kind of damages can occur, and there can be changes in the sex ratio. In one example, one study in insecticide treated plot, the sex ratio is one is to 63, 1.63. Sorry, 1.63. That means that for every one uh, male there will be 1.63 females, whereas in untreated plots it is 1 is to 1 female male female ratio. Here it is for every one female one male there will be 1.63 male. That means the reproduction capacity is getting increased, and the pesticide can affect the plant hormones that I told you, and if the hormones are affected it can lead to changes in the plant growth. I told you pesticides can affect gene transcription. It can interact at the gene level also. And the last point is almost the repetition of the first point. The pesticides can change the susceptibility of the crop to insect pests. That means the use of pesticides can make the host crop more susceptible to insect pests. In the first instance, I told you in rice there will be a reduction in oxalic acid content. So this kind of changes can occur. Are you clear with these points?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay. Then resurgence. What are the factors that influence resurgence? One factor is the selective toxicity of pesticide. That means if a pesticide is acting only on certain stages, most of the pesticides will not have any activity on egg and pupal stage. So if you spray the pesticide, if the egg and pupal stage, egg stage and pupal stage is present, it will survive. It will lead to resurgence. And what way we apply the pesticide? Compared to granular pesticide application, foliar application of pesticides can lead to more resurgence. I will take the example of granular pesticide application in rice. So in rice, farmers usually go for a spray of synthetic pyrethroid in within 2 or 3 weeks of planting. So that with that spray of synthetic pyrethroid, all the insect pests as well as natural enemies will get killed. Within the next week, insect population starts building up, but natural enemy population won't be building up. But what happens if we are going for broadcasting of a pesticide? Those natural enemies which are remaining on the leaf, on the aerial part, will not get affected. Only those natural enemies which are on the aquatic soil or water will get affected. All those natural enemies, say spiders, coccinellids, and all which are remaining on the aerial part will not get affected. So that method of application is extremely critical. Then the rate of pesticide use, if you are using higher pesticide rate, then chance of resurgence is more. And the number of times the pesticide is sprayed. If you increase the number of sprays, the resistance also gets increased. Then I will go into the next term, hormoligosis or pesticide-induced hormesis. Have you heard about this term? Hormoligosis or pesticide-induced hormesis?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Then what is it?
It affects the reproduction in insects.
Yes. But in hormoligosis, the thing is that the term means hormo means to excite. Oligo means in small quantities. That means if you are using a pesticide at higher concentration, it will lead to the mortality of the insect. But if you are using a sublethal dose of, if the farmer doesn't use the recommended dose, he is using a sublethal dose of the insecticide, it will stimulate the multiplication of the insect. It can stimulate egg deposition, it increases the fecundity. So, hormoligosis or pesticide-induced hormesis means increase in the pest population following the use of a sublethal dose of pesticide. At high concentration, it will be lethal, but at low concentration, it will increase the multiplication of insects. Clear?
Yes, sir.
So one more hour, I will finish up the process. I will take factors influencing toxicity of pesticide. Actually, that factors influencing toxicity is the one which is usually taken for first 4 or 5 classes in advanced toxicology syllabus elsewhere in our SAU system. Even in IRA, in advanced toxicology, that is factors affecting toxicity is taught first, later 3 to 4. But uh, I won't be going into that because that is an extremely monotonous topic. I will quickly cover it in half an hour, and then I will give you a brief introduction on nanotechnology in toxicology. Both will take only half an hour each. I'll finish off tomorrow. I will inform the time tomorrow. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.